Something is happening in Israel right now, and it's sending shockwaves across the world. At first glance, it might seem like just another political conflict, another territorial dispute. But if you look deeper, through the lens of prophecies, you'll realize this isn't just about geopolitics. This is about time running out. Events are unfolding that match biblical warnings with chilling precision. Could it be that what the prophets saw thousands of years ago is coming to life right before our eyes? Is this just a coincidence? Or is it a divine red flag waving for all who are paying attention? Because if these prophecies are true, then we're closer to the final chapter. The first sign, Israel's return. For centuries, it seemed impossible. The Jewish people were scattered across the earth, dispersed to every continent, every corner of the globe. Israel no longer existed as a nation, and Jerusalem was trampled by empire after empire. And yet, the Bible had already spoken. They would come back. In Ezekiel 36:24, God declared, "For I will take you from among the nations, gather you out of all countries, and bring you into your own land." Not because of their righteousness, not because they earned it, but because of his name. This wasn't just a promise, it was a prophecy waiting for its appointed time. Then in 1948, something unprecedented happened. After nearly 2 years, Israel was reborn in a single day. Just as Isaiah 66:8 had foretold, can a country be born in a day, or a nation be brought forth in a moment? And yet, it happened. A nation came back to life, and the prophetic clock began ticking louder than ever. But here's what most people miss. Israel's return wasn't the end of the prophecy, it was just the beginning. Because God didn't just promise a physical return to the land, he promised a spiritual transformation. In Ezekiel 36:26, he says, "I will give you a new heart and put a new spirit within you." That hasn't happened yet. Many in Israel still don't recognize their Messiah. Peace is still elusive. Enemies still surround her borders. So why does this matter now? Because the regathering of Israel is the first undeniable sign that we are living in prophetic times. It's the foundation upon which every other end-time prophecy stands. And if the first sign has already been fulfilled, then what comes next might be closer than we think. The second sign, nations against Jerusalem. If the rebirth of Israel was the starting gun, then what's unfolding now in Jerusalem may be the warning siren. The Bible doesn't just predict that Israel will return, it warns that in the final days, the nations of the world will turn against her. Zechariah 12:3 puts it in chilling terms. On that day, when all the nations of the earth are gathered against her, I will make Jerusalem an immovable rock for all the nations. All who try to move it will injure themselves. Look around. What once sounded impossible is becoming reality. Global institutions are increasingly calling for the division of Jerusalem. Powerful governments, some of which were once Israel's strongest allies, are now questioning her right to defend herself. And in almost every international summit, Jerusalem isn't just a footnote, it's the center of controversy. The world is watching, judging, and positioning itself. But few realize they're stepping into prophecy. Right now, world leaders are pushing hard for the so-called two-state solution. It's a plan that would slice Jerusalem in two and hand part of it over to another entity. What sounds like peace on paper is, in reality, a direct defiance of God's decree. Because the Bible is crystal clear. Jerusalem is not just any city, it's his city. Joel 3:2 reveals the consequence. I will gather all nations and bring them down to the valley of Jehoshaphat. There I will put them on trial for what they did to my inheritance, my people Israel, because they scattered my people among the nations and divided up my land. It's happening right now. Every policy, every alliance, every act of betrayal is being weighed. As the nations align against Jerusalem, they are unknowingly positioning themselves for judgment. And the danger isn't just political, it's spiritual. Because to touch Jerusalem is to touch the apple of God's eye. Jerusalem has always been the heart of prophecy, but today it's the pressure point of the world. And as tension builds around this sacred city, we inch closer to a final confrontation that will shake every nation and usher in the return of the king. The third sign, Jacob's trouble in the hidden location. The prophecy of Jacob's trouble mentioned in Jeremiah 37 unveils one of the most sobering yet deeply significant events in the timeline of the end times. It speaks of a day unlike any other, a time of anguish for Israel that precedes their ultimate redemption. This is not just a moment of military conflict or political pressure. It is a spiritual crucible, a divine reckoning that will shake the very core of the Jewish people. The verse says, "Alas, that day is great, so that none is like it, and it is the time of Jacob's trouble, but he shall be saved out of it." To fully grasp its weight, we must understand Jacob himself, a man whose life was marked by struggle. He wrestled with man, with God, and with his own identity until he was broken and finally surrendered. In many ways, modern Israel mirrors this story, restored physically to the land, yet not fully returned to the heart of God. The time of Jacob's trouble will be a period where everything is stripped away. False alliances, political defenses, even illusions of self-reliance. And Israel once again finds itself wrestling with God. Jesus describes this same moment in Matthew 24:21 as a time of great tribulation, such as has not been since the beginning of the world. But in the midst of that storm, God has prepared a place. Revelation 12:6 speaks of a woman, symbolizing Israel, fleeing into the wilderness to a location prepared by God, where she will be nourished for 260 days. Some believe this could be the ancient rock fortress of Petra in modern Jordan, hidden among the mountains, impenetrable and cut off from the chaos. Others see it as a symbolic refuge, where God will supernaturally protect his remnant. Either way, it's a reminder that even during the darkest hour, God never abandons his people. The fire of affliction will refine them, not consume them. As Zechariah 13:9 declares, "They will call on my name, and I will answer them. I will say they are my people, and they will say, the Lord is our God." What looks like collapse will actually be the catalyst for Israel's greatest spiritual awakening. Through tribulation comes transformation. Through the breaking comes the blessing. And it is precisely in this moment of crisis that the path is cleared for the Messiah's return. Romans 11:26 confirms that the deliverer will come from Zion, not to a rebellious nation, but to a people finally ready to receive their king. Jacob's trouble, then, is not the end of the story. It is the necessary chapter before redemption. And as we witness tensions rise in the Middle East, hostility encircle Jerusalem, and Israel stand increasingly isolated on the world stage, we would be wise to ask, are we seeing the early shadows of this prophetic storm? Because if we are, then what comes next is not just about Israel, it's about all of us. The fourth sign, the third temple is rebuilt. The third temple, the temple of God in Jerusalem, holds significant importance in both biblical history and prophecy. After the second temple was destroyed in AD 70, the current temple no longer exists in Jerusalem. People wondered when and if it will be rebuilt. Many conclude that the temple must be rebuilt before end-time sacrifices are halted, as prophesied in Daniel 12:1. What does the Bible say about the third temple and when it might be built? After the destruction of Solomon's temple, the Jews were subjected to 70 years of captivity in Babylon. And afterward, God began the process of returning them to their homeland to rebuild. The construction of the third temple is the element of the ingathering of the exiles. It's the key. It comes time for all the Jewish people to return to their land. The temple needed to be built first. Under Ezra's guidance, a group of Jews returned to Jerusalem and resumed sacrifices to God. These sacrifices were performed before work had even begun on the second temple. This shows that only an altar is necessary for sacrifices to be offered. A temple is not a requirement. In Ezekiel 40:48, we read about a vision of a future temple. The vision is recorded after the destruction of the first temple and before the construction of the second temple. The second temple was not a fulfillment of this vision because it did not have the physical features described by Ezekiel. So some connect this with the prophecy of the sacrifices being stopped and conclude that there will be a temple built in Jerusalem before Christ's return. But as we have seen, the sacrifices don't require a temple. When you study the description of Ezekiel's temple, it becomes clear that this is a structure that will be built after Jesus returns. These prophecies clearly describe a temple to be built during the millennial reign of Christ on earth, not a temple built by human beings in this age. When God decides that the underlying causes have been resolved and it's time to bring the Jewish people back to their land and get His world back in order, changes will occur that will allow us to peacefully start construction. Once the temple is up and running, all of humanity will be uplifted and attracted to it, and Jews will appear out of the woodwork to return. That in turn will serve as the catalyst for world peace. The Messianic era is not just a change in demographics. It's a quantum leap in the way human beings perceive their world. Once that change has occurred, things that seem absurd to us today will appear perfectly reasonable. So just as we cannot imagine world peace until it comes, the same with the building of the third temple. Nevertheless, let's attempt to get at least a glimpse of what's behind this idea. How is building the temple in Jerusalem a prerequisite to collecting all Jews? And how does the ingathering of the exiles promote world peace? What's the connection? The Bible mentions that some end times events will occur in a temple in Jerusalem. 2 Thessalonians 2:4, speaking of the Antichrist, tells us, he will oppose and will exalt himself over everything that is called God or is worshipped, so that he sets himself up in God's temple, proclaiming himself to be God. Before the end times can occur, a temple must be present for these events to occur in. The Islamic Dome of the Rock is on the site where the Jewish temple is supposed to be. Muslims believe this is the place from which Muhammad ascended into heaven, making it the third most sacred of Muslim shrines. For the Jews to take over this place and build a temple upon it would be unthinkable in today's political climate. But during the tribulation, the building of the temple will come about, protected by the Antichrist. When we see the temple being constructed, we can be sure the end times are indeed upon us. The Antichrist will be reigning, the church will already have been raptured, and the first half of the tribulation will have passed. But there will still be time for people to come to Christ for salvation. The end time in the third temple, the Antichrist declares that he is God while sitting in the temple. These two passages help us understand that the temple must exist by the middle of the tribulation in order for the Antichrist to be able to sit in the temple. The temple must be built by that time. This means the temple could be built before the tribulation starts. It could also be built before the rapture. Therefore, the answer to the question is that the temple could be built before or after the rapture. But the temple is built before the Antichrist declares himself to be God. Must open their eyes and hearts to the truth of God's holy word. The Bible. Read Genesis all the way to the end of Revelation. When Jesus comes back the second time to stop mankind from killing everybody and take control over the earth to rule for 1,000 years. Then Jesus will make a new heaven and earth. Hallelujah. Jesus is the only hope for the world. With the birth of the red heifer, one of the most important prerequisites of building the third temple is met. The Bible clearly teaches that a new temple, the third temple, will be built at some point in time so that a number of prophecies concerning the second coming of Christ would be fulfilled. The Bible states that the third temple will be there during the period of the Great Tribulation. The prophet Daniel refers to this temple when he says that the prince who is to come, meaning the Antichrist, will enter it and stop the sacrifices in the middle of the tribulation. And he shall make a strong covenant with many for 1 week, and for half of the week he shall put an end to sacrifice and offering. And on the wing of abominations shall come one who makes desolate, until the decreed end is poured out on the desolator. The Apostle Paul mentions it when he declares that the man of lawlessness will profane the temple by entering it and declaring himself to be God. Let no one deceive you in any way, for that day will not come unless the rebellion comes first and the man of lawlessness is revealed, the son of destruction, who opposes and exalts himself against every so-called God or object of worship, so that he takes his seat in the temple of God, proclaiming himself to be God. Jesus also spoke about this abomination of desolation at his second coming in the Olivet Discourse, indicating that a temple will at that time be destroyed. Oh, when you see standing in the holy place the abomination that causes desolation spoken of through the prophet Daniel, let the reader understand. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. The third temple is also mentioned in the book of Revelation when Apostle John is told to measure it. Then I was given a measuring rod like a staff, and I was told, "Rise and measure the temple of God and the altar and those who worship there. But do not measure the court outside the temple. Leave that out, For it is given over to the nations, and they will trample the holy city for 42 months. So the question would be, when will the temple be rebuilt? The Bible does not reveal the answer to this question. All it says for certain is that the temple will be in existence when the Antichrist reveals himself, and that it will be there at the time of the tribulation. Since this will be only 3.5 years into the tribulation, some have concluded that the temple will likely be rebuilt before the tribulation begins, because of the unlikelihood of completing such a magnificent temple in such a short period of time. On the other hand, the temple can be erected quite rapidly because the Jews have proposed plans to simply first erect a tent temple, like the Tabernacle of Moses. The Temple Institute has already made ready everything for this purpose and has been training priests from the Levitical line to prepare for this eventuality. The other question is the where question. The next temple can only be built where the two previous temples stood because the Holy of Holies must be in the exact same spot. But there are now many controversies as to where exactly was the last temple located. On the Temple Mount or not, even on the Temple Mount, but north or south of it. Most scholars still have a firm conviction that the old temple stood where the Dome of the Rock currently stands. This belief may be wrong, but apparently there is no way to prove the exact location without conducting archaeological excavations on the Temple Mount, something which is currently prohibited by the Muslims as well as the national laws. If the third temple is to be built where the Dome of the Rock now stands, then that Muslim structure must first of all be removed, either by man or by God. It could, of course, be burned to the ground by a missile or by an earthquake. No one knows. A growing group of Christians nonetheless have a great passion for the third temple. Something could happen to create a surge of nationalistic pride that will demand a new temple. This catalytic event could be the discovery of the Ark of the Covenant, or perhaps at a nearby excavation site, or a political event that ensues. There is the possibility that the ancient temples were not located where the Dome of the Rock currently sits. There is strong evidence that their location was to the north of the dome, and that the sacrificial altar inside the dome was the one that Solomon built in the middle of the court to handle the thousands of special sacrifices that he offered to the Lord on the day the first temple was dedicated. If that is so, then the third temple could be built north of the Dome of the Rock, putting the dome in the court of the Gentiles. This might well be the solution the Antichrist will come up with when he negotiates peace between the Jews and the Arabs. We are still not sure. The birth of the new red heifer, which remains to be confirmed as a suitable candidate for sacrificial offering, fulfilled an important prerequisite for the construction of the third temple, which will definitely be there at the end times according to the Old and New Testaments. The temple could be erected at the beginning of the tribulation in the form of a tent temple, like the Tabernacle of Moses, with a more permanent structure eventually built around and above it. The Antichrist will desecrate this temple in the middle of the tribulation. The third temple will be destroyed at the second coming of Jesus Christ, and the fourth temple, from which Jesus will reign over all the earth, will appear. It is described in detail in Ezekiel 40:46. The words of the Lord ring loud and true. A small detail, yet when carefully examined and harmonized, can ingrain a lot of significance, meaning, and instructions to those who follow his word. Praise the Lord, and may he come again real soon.